I love knowing that on this topic of path of least resistance, I love knowing that it's really just, it's right there in front of me all the time. And that if I veer away from it a little bit, it just takes a slight change of focus to get back.
Esther's friend said to her the other day, "You know, we are only a baby or a puppy away from alignment."
True.
Because it takes very little to get right back there.
And I used to think that it was a giant effort. Like when I was in the vortex, it just felt so, it was like ecstasy. And then when I was out, I was so miserable. And I would be out for longer and longer because I was focusing on how miserable I was for not being in the vortex. And finally, I have learned that it's literally that shift of focus.
The good news is that when you go to sleep at night, your momentum stops. So even if you have been encouraging a path that is taking you from who you really are and what you really want, when you slumber, that momentum subsides, it stops. So when you awaken, you have a very good opportunity to make the choices that keep you in better and better alignment. And knowing that and deliberately reaching for better feeling thoughts is very productive.
And thank you for teaching us that as well, because that made a huge difference in my life. Because I used to wake up and I was just right where I left it, miserable, worrying about work or whatever. And now I get up, and even if I start to go that way, I just stop, and I don't even have to think about it.
But there's a piece, you see, we've been talking about all of these pieces, and you've been very good at picking these pieces up and incorporating them into what you know. But let's talk about this last piece or two and how it fits in. So let's say you are like most people. You are living a sort of conditional life. And almost everyone offers almost all of their vibration, which law of attraction is responding to all the time, in response to what they are observing. So if you're observing something that feels good, then you're getting more of it. If you're observing something that doesn't feel so good, you're getting more of it. And most are sort of a mixed bag, so you're getting some of all of it. So let's say that for whatever reason, you have been and are living a sort of conditional experience where you're focused upon conditions and responding to them. So let's say that you are, for example, an employer who is focused upon an employee who is not pleasing you. So clearly, because of the way you feel, you're not focused upon what you want. You're focused upon what you've got, but you're not focusing upon what you want. And you can tell by the way you feel that you're not in alignment with who you really are and what you really want. You could find the vibrational essence of an improved employee, but you're not. Instead, you're focusing upon what you've got. So now you go down that path further and further. Your deviation from what you want and what you've got gets stronger and stronger. You could have turned it around earlier and easier. You didn't have to go so far, but finally it goes far enough that you fire that employee. Well, it's an action that in some cases we think is a good one. In other words, it could be easier for you. In fact, we would say it would be easier for you to find your path of greatest alignment relative to that position that you want to feel, now that that person who isn't doing a good job isn't there. In other words, now they're not there to observe. It's more likely that you could think about what you want and find vibrational alignment with it and then attract it. But most don't, because they fire the person and then they think about why they fired the person. They hold themselves in the vibrational pattern, even though the person is no longer there. They hold themselves in the vibrational frequency of the unwanted. So whether it's this example or a relationship or anything, the tendency is to be so conditioned to focus on conditions that even when you sometimes make a very good decision, which is to put yourself in a better position where that condition isn't beating up on you anymore and isn't controlling the vibrational frequency, still in your guilt about not pleasing them, in your guilt about doing what you think is best for you, you hold yourself in those patterns where things can't improve. So the next one's pretty much like the last one. Different faces, different places, but same experience keeps happening to you. Is this making sense to you? So What would be a better plan? Well, a better plan would be, before it gets so uncomfortable, to make a new decision about what you want. Because if you could make a better decision, a clearer decision, say it again, a clearer decision, say it more specifically, a clearer, less resisted statements. In other words, clearer meaning purer, meaning fewer contradictions about it, throwing less contradiction on the path. So if you could make, even when you still have this employee who is not pleasing you, if you could stay focused upon what you want, that employee would either come with you or go away, but you wouldn't reach that place, that great crescendo of discomfort. You see what we're getting at? So when you decide that you're going to play it out vibrationally and emotionally rather than in terms of conditions, what begins to happen is the conditions begin to take care of themselves. You begin creating from what we are calling the inside out. You begin holding your own vibrational patterns in alignment with who you really are, and then everything else just becomes a cooperative component to the vibrational essence that you have established. So we want to say to you, to make it even clearer, you are human beings, not human doings, which means you are offerers of vibration. And yes, of course, you are also actors. You are also those who offer action. But if you let yourself believe that the action trumps everything, so you're just acting and reacting, then you're not taking care of the vibration, and then the reactions are just following the path of greater and greater resistance. We think you heard most of that. It was a pretty good unfolding. So now where are you?
Apparently you're reading my mind. Because I have that exact situation at work and trying to figure out what to do with an employee. So you answered the question I didn't even ask yet, but thank you.
Well, the thing is, we want to put this statement in the mix, and then we'll clarify it because it sounds like a flawed statement. You can't get there from there. Now, to clarify, what we want to say is, you can't get to where you want to be with action. You've got to get to where you want to be with vibration. But sometimes taking an action gives you a reprieve from things that were keeping you vibrationally out of whack. And that's what so many of you are not willing to give yourself a break without feeling guilty. And so when you remove something unwanted from your experience, you usually don't remove the unwanted vibration because you stand in a justifying mode or a defensive mode, where if you could just take the action and make a statement to yourself, I'm doing the best that I can do, and this was a good choice for me, and then let it rest a little bit. Don't keep it active by talking about it. What will happen is your true vibration will take hold. It's like, those of you who have been hearing us for a while, it's our longest and favorite analogy. Vision a cork bobbing on the surface of the water, and let's call it alignment. You can hold it under the water, let's call that resistance. When you let go of it, it will bob right back to the surface. That's the thing that we want you to understand, that if it were not for the conditions that you are so intertwined with and sometimes unhappy with, if you could focus in a more caring way about the way you feel, you could disentangle from those conditions, your cork would float, and now you're in the driver's seat. Now you're in a place where what you want is flowing to you consistently. So let's go back and revisit that strong statement that we made. You can't get there from here. You can't get there from where you are. What do we mean? Don't try it conditionally. Do it vibrationally. But wait, Abraham, you just suggested that maybe it might be a good idea for me to give myself permission to remove myself from the unwanted condition. Yes, we did. We think you should remove yourself from every unwanted condition if you can. But once you remove yourself from the unwanted condition, you've got to take the more important step, which was always the more important step, which is remove yourself from the vibrational patterning. And you'll reach the place that you can take the vibrational patterning without the action. You will. But in the meanwhile, do whatever it takes to feel better about where you are. How's that?
Beautiful.
Path of least resistance. So you want to talk about something, and let's see if we can find what the path of least resistance is. Want to talk about something real? You want to talk about something, some experience, and let's walk through it and find the nuggets of lesser and less resistance?
Certainly, we could use the example of the employee.
All right, so start talking.
So I have an employee that simply doesn't work. She can't do her tasks. She is unable to perform what she was hired to do.
All right, so here's the question that we have for you. And this is the only question that will ever matter. Do you think that we're not talking about anybody else, we're not talking about what's right or wrong or what's most voted on, we're just asking you. Do you think that since the only thing that matters is your relationship with your inner being. You see, we're not talking about getting a better employee. We're not talking about even improving that condition. We're talking about your alignment. Do you think you have a better probability of being in alignment if that person was not bumping into you all day, every day? Or if that person is bumping into you all day, every day? What's the path of least resistance?
Not bumping into is easier.
Do you think you would feel better if you weren't bumping up against all of those inadequacies? Or do you think you would feel better bumping up against all of those inadequacies? Stay with us.
Not bumping up.
So, do you think that overnight this person is going to become adequate in all of those ways?
No.
So, if you feel that you would feel better not bumping up, we're not talking about getting the job done. We're just talking about how you personally feel, because how you personally feel is everything. Because how you personally feel has everything to do with the way you translate vibration. And in your vortex is the perfect employee that you can't find because you're bumping up against somebody that's keeping you mad all the time. You see what we're getting at? So what's the path of least resistance? To bump up against something that doesn't feel good? Well, the path of least resistance would be to be such a powerful creator that you're not bumping up against it. But are you there? You're not there. You're bumping up against it. So what's your path of least resistance? How are you going to keep from bumping up against it? Can you give yourself permission to meet your needs or your desires first? So let's say you decide, that's the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is for that person to not be there. Now what happens? What happens if that person were not there? So let's say that you've made that move and now that person is not there. Now what happens? What happens to the work? Was any work getting done?
A little. Yeah.
So what happens now that little bit of work that was getting done isn't getting done, but all of those mistakes that were being made aren't being made? Right. Does it still remain the path of least resistance for you?
Somebody has to replace her.
You're getting too far down the road. We're just asking you, do you feel better now that that condition has changed? Do you feel better? Because you might feel worse. In other words, you might say, no, now nobody's answering the phone. But that's what we mean when we say only you can answer that. You've got to take the path of least resistance for you. You can't do what Dr. Phil says that you should do. You can't do what the debate on the talk show says is the right thing to do. You can't even get twirled up in what it means to that person who had a job who now doesn't have a job, because that just adds clutter to your path. We're just asking you, is it really so complicated that you can't say, I feel better with this than that? It's so interesting because it's so hard for most people to give themselves permission to feel better, because it feels like you should be serving the other. You got to give yourself permission to do what feels best for you. But first you've got to decide what doesn't feel good and what does feel good, and you've just got to keep asking that question and following that path. And before you know it, you'll be in a place where you'll be so clear that you'll be evoking from others that clarity, or they will not come into your experience. They will be a mismatch. And if that which isn't clarity is coming into your experience, it's because you're not offering clarity. And if you're not offering clarity, the majority of the reason that you're not offering clarity is because you're observing what you've got and adding a mess to the mix.